Hello, I'm the Grub Street Lodger, and it's the new year. So, new year, new adventures. We'll see what comes up. But I'm going to talk now about what happened in December in terms of reading and theatre. So, I started the month with a little book here. This is Dr. Johnson in Cambridge by S.C. Roberts. It's a strange book because it's almost this sub-genre in which I have indeed contributed, in which Samuel Johnson is put into the modern world somehow. So in mine, it was like a time travel machine that brought Samuel Johnson back to comment on the modern world, and he got really into Top Gear and EastEnders, and he just became a couch potato. In this, it was written in the 20s, and it's Samuel Johnson in Cambridge University in the 20s. Now, Samuel Johnson was obviously an Oxford man, so he has some sort of wry things to say about Cambridge and about various issues going on in Cambridge. They're still discussing whether to give women degrees and things like that, and just, Cambridge sport and cricket and things. Yeah, it's very odd. And then it sort of mixes Johnson's world with the modern world. So there's Boswell, and they talk about Hester Thrale and stuff, but it's definitely 1920s Cambridge. It's just a little oddity. One of the most interesting elements for me was the sort of the characterization of Johnson, because it's very much a Boswell-inspired characterization, and it's very much a sort of men's men club kind of Johnson. So he's not into women getting degrees, whereas the real Johnson was very keen on women learning, and indeed devised a whole system of education for Hester Thrale's children and stuff. So it's Johnson as seen from a very particular time period. You can almost smell the Oxford bags coming off it, even though it's in Cambridge. It's a fun little read, and it was just a little one, really. Then, so I read a big book, and I got bored. Well, not bored, just fed up taking this big heavy book to school. So I took little books to school and read those, and then read the big book when I came home. I got through a few little books that way. So I read T.S. Eliot, Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. This is the poems that inspired the musical Cats. It's a sort of weirdo ethnography of cat culture in the 30s, or fake cat culture, the Jellicles, and the poems fall into two categories about specific cats, like Mungo Jerry or Mr. Mistopheles or whatever, or cats in general, like how do you address a cat, or there was how do you address a cat. There was a whole bunch of other ones as well. They're quirky, they're fun, they're sweet. I still don't know why they made it into a musical. I wouldn't have read that and gone, that's musical material. Though, I suppose, was it one of these ones that was made into a concept album? And no, it was made straight into a musical, wasn't it? I can see it as a concept album of each little poem being a song. They're rhythmic, they're musical, they're interesting, they have peculiar plays on words and things, but still, it seems weird to create a musical out of it. But it's just a nice, light, fluffy thing. It's very different from The Wasteland, let's say that. So I carried on with sort of poetry stuff, Falling Up, Shel Silverstein. He sort of falls in between Edward Lear and Ogden Nash, really. He has the Ogden Nash fondness for forced and peculiar rhyme, the Edward Lear nonsensical, but also the way the pictures interact with the words, and some of the poems even refer to pictures on previous pages and things. And yeah, it's poems for children. He's very fun. It's very light. It's another just enjoyable thing that I read at school. In the little gaps when I read and get told off for it. So yeah, it was fun, and it was nice. It wasn't deep or anything. Now, this book is called Less Eminent Victorians. And one of the things about this book is it's almost more interesting for what it is than what it is. So it's written in the 30s, and they've gone through a whole bunch of Victorian sort of illustrated things and got the illustrations. And then, looking at the illustrations, they've made limericks about them. So that one's not the best one. Where's a really good one? Oh, I really should. And the best ones recontextualize the picture, so the picture's something very different to the poem. There was an old person of Trunch, whose jokes had been printed in Punch, but the terrible strain had affected his brain, and he often refused any lunch. And then there you go. There's obviously a picture of something else. And then in there is a little note saying they're going to publish a book of just plain pictures. And so the idea is that other people play this game. They look at the pictures and create a silly limerick, and then they send them in, and then they're going to publish a third book of homegrown silly limericks that have been sent into them. So not a bad little dodge, actually, just out of copyright pictures that they've managed to create 3 books out of it. And it's really entertaining, and I'm so annoyed I didn't find some of the best ones, because some of the best ones just take the piss so much of the pictures. It's wonderful. Next then, very bad poetry. I've read bits of this, but this was the first time I just read it straight through, and it is literally just very bad poetry. But unlike The Stuffed Owl, which is another anthology of bad poetry, it will accept bad poets writing bad poetry. Stuffed Owl is good poets writing bad poetry, good poets on an off day. But this will accept bad poets, and there's poems about teeth and about giant cheeses, and William McGonagall gets his just desserts in there. The downside of it is that it often doesn't show the whole poem. It just shows a funny chunk of the poem, and that's kind of you kind of want a bit more sometimes. You want to see it all in its context, but having little bits, although making it feel a bit flimsier than it might, does at least mean that you just get the funny stuff. And here is, they reckon, the worst poem ever written in the English language. It's called A Tragedy by Theophile Marzials. Death. Plop. The barges in the river flop. Flop, plop. Above, beneath. From the slimy branches the grey drips drop to the oozy waters that lounge and flop. And my heart shrieks, stop. And my heart shrieks, die. Ugh. Yet I knew, if a woman is false, can a friend be true? It was only a lie from beginning to end, my devil, my friend. So what do I care? And my head is empty as air. I can dare, plop, plop, the barges flop, drip, drop. I can dare, and let myself all run away from my head and stop, drop, dead, plop, flop, plop. I think he's drowned himself, well, with all that plopping. Or he had intense diarrhea, I don't know. And then the last little one, Jane Austen, The History of England, which actually the full title is like A Very Prejudiced History of England, with prejudice underlined. And it is, and that makes it fun. And it's Jane Austen juvenilia, and I always prefer her juvenilia. I think she's more fun when she's younger, without that sort of sharp wit. It's just kind of silly and fun. Though, bit weird, some of her prejudices. She's from Yorkshire, so of course she prefers the York side of the Wars of the Roses, but she's really, really against Elizabeth I and really, really into Mary Queen of Scots, and feels that Elizabeth I did her dirty. As a result, is really supportive of the Stuart clan dynasty, royal lineage, and I just find that funny because the Stuarts are, I think, objectively the very worst. Just the most incompetent, the most unlucky royal family in certainly the history of British Isles, if not in all royalty, because they are just useless. Right, so now the rest is big works. So the big work I was reading when I got home, that I had to read the little ones for, was Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. It's got that very famous first line about how happy families are all the same and unhappy families aren't, and it's phrased better than that. But I disagree. I think happy families have all their differences too. However, it's a really pithy first line, and it does sort of enter what the book's going to be. We're going to follow 3 couples, and we're going to see them in their happiness and their unhappiness. There's Levin and Kitty. Their unhappiness is at the beginning. It takes a bit of time for them to get together, but once they get together, they start to merge. Levin overthinks everything to a very painful extent, indeed to an irritating extent, but he learns to let it go, and in fact he ends the book with this sort of cosmic. It's a belief in God, but it's almost something bigger than belief in God. But it's almost like, oh, things are okay. There is a cosmic okayness that you can plug into. Another couple is Steva and Dolly. And Steva was my favourite character. They're the first couple introduced to, and the problem is simply that Steva is really open, and that makes everyone love him, and he's really nice and really friendly, and everyone's his mate, and he has no loyalty to anyone, and he cheats on his wife, because when he's not with his wife, he's open to all the other influences around. And when he is with his wife, he's very loving, and he feels that he maintains his love for her, and she feels she's getting the raw end of the deal, as indeed she is, because another element of his openness is very open, giving people money, not so much charity, just spending it on stuff, and so he's spending all their finances. And then the third couple are the Karenins, Alexei Karenin and Anna, and he's sort of right and good, but he's very cold, very calculating, and not very loving, and she's very warm and passionate. She's actually Steva's sister, and they sort of almost share this being loved by everyone. And she gets loved by Count Vronsky, and she loves Count Vronsky back, and they have a passion that just doesn't happen with her and her husband, and she runs off with him, and things happen, and there's a big tragic ending for them. What I loved was, despite the length of the book, it was almost perfectly paced. It didn't feel long, it didn't feel overstuffed like Les Mis, it didn't feel stretched out like Clarissa. I read Clarissa last year, and I haven't made a video about it yet. Maybe I will. It fit perfectly in that space, and I love the conception of the characters, because their faults and their good sides all come from the same place. So Steve was open, and so his faults come from his openness, but also his good side comes from his openness. Anna is passionate, and her faults come from that, and her good side comes from that. You've got her husband Alexei, whose fault is being very fastidious, but that's also his good side. The good things about him are his fastidiousness as well as the bad, and I love that. It feels very real. They're not they are contradictions in some ways, but they both stem from one place. So the things that tear them apart are central to them, and it's really good and really interesting and really well paced, and the characters are great. And the tragic thing that happens is the thing I knew that would happen, is the only thing I knew about the book. It feels sudden. It's shocking, even if you know it's going to happen, because, well, there's this wonderful little run up to it where Anna is just hates everybody, she's passionate, she's usually loving everyone, but this time she's hating every little person she sees is annoying. You think, oh, she's in a really bad mood. Oh, she's going to a train station. Oh, I know what's going to happen next. But it just comes, and it's shocking, even when you know it's going to be there. Levin annoyed me a bit. I didn't find his bits as boring as some people say they do. Like he's in the country. You find out him snipe shooting and trying to work out the best way of being essentially a gentleman landowner at a time when Russia has got rid of serfdom, but hasn't. It's still in a rough place, and it's gonna be, because if these characters survive naturally, they're gonna have a rough time in a few years. So there you go. And some people have read it and said that they deserve it. These insular, but I didn't think that. I didn't feel that. I thought they were real people. They all happen to be rich, real people. But their realness, it was good. It was really good. Okay. Next thing I read was Phantom of the Opera. I have, of course, seen the musical, but this is very different. The tone is more like a mystery novel. It's supposed to be Gaston Leroux, the author, is like an investigative journalist finding out about these mysterious events 30 years earlier. And there's a number of them, and they all tie together. And his supposition is, what if the rumoured opera ghost was real? And then he finds more about that, and about Christine and Rao, and the story. And there's Eric. And Eric is a fascinating character because he's hideous, and he's also a genius at everything. He's a genius architect, he's a genius criminal, he's a genius murderer. He has a torture room in his house under the opera. And the torture room reminds me of the House of Burning Glass from Hurlo Thrumbo. It's sort of this weird visual effect of a forest that drives people mad. It's very peculiar. That's not in the musical. And he's also a genius ventriloquist because, hey, you know, he could go into children's entertainment if he wanted. Now, the big scenes in the musical, you know, the big chandelier, that happens quite early on. In fact, this book just fizzles out. They all go after him. Then they all get bashed on the head and wake up and, oh, he's let us go. What is this? And then he turns up a little later and he's dying of heartbreak because Christina let him go. Yeah, gave him a kiss and he was like, oh, I'll let you go and I'll let you go off with your love and I'll just die heartbroken. It's schlock. It's cheesy, crappy schlock. But it's very entertaining, cheesy, crappy schlock. It's very easy to read. It was good. I enjoyed it a lot. But yeah, it's not high art. Right, then I read The Dubliners by James Joyce, which is a collection of short stories. And at first I was like, these seem a bit slight. I'm not really getting, it's James Joyce. I've read Ulysses. I've read, actually, the first 80 pages of Finnegan's Wake. I've read that on Goodreads, because I reckon reading the first 80 pages, that's good enough, to be honest. I don't like Artist as a Young Man. I don't like that character whose name I've suddenly forgotten, the dual protagonist of Ulysses, the young guy. I love Leopold Bloom, but I hate... Anyway, he's... Oh, Stephen Dedalus, don't like him. But he's not in this. I thought these were a bit slight, but then they accumulate. Like, there's one about two boys going off on sort of bunking off school, and it's supposed to be this wonderful, jolly, but they meet a weird, creepy man who probably masturbates at them, almost certainly, because James Joyce is a bit of a sex weirdo, if you've read Ulysses. And then there's another one about somebody who wants to buy a prospective lover a gift. He's too shy to talk to her, but there's going to be this grand bazaar. And then he goes to it, and it's pathetic, and it's very Craggy Island, like their Funland or whatever. And basically, each of these stories involves an epiphany where a character realises how trapped they are, and then doesn't really do anything about it. So it's all these characters realising they're trapped in their life, and that's it. And each one builds, and each one's interesting. But at the very end, you get this whole... It's rare in that it's greater than the sum of its parts, because each part is a little bit of a slight, like, oh, that's quite a slight story, but all together it builds up to this big feeling of a town that's just stagnant and paralysed and can't move on, and it's probably because of the English, to be honest, but hey. So, last book I read in December, Georges Perec, Life, a User's Manual. He once wrote a novel without the letter E, which would mean on the title page, surely he'd be called Gorgy Prick. But Gorge, no, not because no E, but Gorg Prick. But anyway, this one did have letter Z in it. But he was part of this thing called the Oulipo movement. Oulipo? I don't know how you pronounce it. It's an acronym in French. But they did this thing called constrained writing, where they created rules for themselves in the book. So he's got loads of rules in this book. Yet they don't matter. They helped him construct it and they help him navigate it, but they don't impinge it. It's still quite a fun book. So at a certain moment in time, just before 8 o'clock in the evening, the whole of this block of flats, this the French block of flats, is frozen, and the point of view goes in each room and describes the room, what's in it, the paintings in it, the furnishings, the people, but all the people are frozen in an action. And then this goes into some backstory, maybe about who lived in the room before, maybe about the frozen people, maybe a story inspired by one of the objects or the painting or whatever. And you just go through this thing and you get this picture. And the sort of key organising theme is puzzles. So they're like puzzle pieces that you're putting in to get essentially the history of this building and the people in it and how they've all related, and the ones who've gone and died and moved on and the ones who've come in and all of this. And it's all sort of loosely formed around this guy called Bartlebooth, who's an Englishman who creates the most pointless way of living you can ever imagine. In fact, he's an Englishman, but his project of life uh, is so very French. I can't imagine an English person actually doing what Bartlebooth does. It's not an English. There are English ways of wasting your life, but this is French. That's all I'm gonna say. But yeah, it's very good. Yeah, you get all these little stories. So it reminds me a bit of Manuscript Found in Saragossa, but the frame story isn't as tied up and the stories aren't as nested, and it's actually a lot easier to read. And all the little stories, they're really good fun. There's a lot of detective stories. For some reason, everybody owns a detective novel in this book, and a lot of them are explained. But there's some real sort of mysteries and things as well, of why the daughter of this woman, daughter and her husband, were shot. There are some family histories. There's a really interesting relationship to World War II because most of the characters were alive in it. And it sort of shows how most of them tried to ignore it. Bartlebooth just carried on his thing despite the war, and most of the characters just tried to get on with it. One was an active Nazi sympathiser, and one was an active resistance member, but for the most part, they just sort of petered along whoever was in charge, and that's interesting. Especially now, if you go to Paris, half the roads have been renamed to resistance figures, and it's like, yeah, that's not really what happened though. It wasn't a big boiling hotbed of resistance. It was a lot of ennui, I suppose. Yeah, but yeah, it's a really good book. But this is one where Dubliners is more than the sum of its parts. Life a User's Manual is exactly a sum of its parts. Each part is great, but it doesn't pull you through because there's not really much of a narrative pulling you through. So you get to the end of a section and you go, oh, that was good. And you read a new section and you go, oh, that's good. And they're all pretty good, except for there's this one about banking, which got boring. But they're all pretty good, all pretty interesting. Some of them are quite weird. There's one brief snapshot of 2 sentences of a man who's on his bed with a whole bunch of sex dolls. And you never find out more about that. And it includes little bits of advertising and baking and all this. And so the way he constructed it was he formed up the rooms in like a grid, and then he moved a knight through it. So that's how you go through the rooms, the way a knight would go through it. And then each room, he basically had this set of charts that it's like random choice sort of thing that said, this story's got to contain a diamond and a dog, or this story's got to contain Horatio Nelson and some porridge. And so that's how he constructed it. So it was more of an aid to construction. Reading it, you don't necessarily need to know that. It's quite interesting. I liked it. But, as I say, it's exactly the sum of its parts. Whereas, Dubliners was more the sum of its parts. Phantom of the Opera was good fun. It was a romp. And then Anna Karenina is a big... It's not even a big story really, but it just fits perfectly. It's hard to explain. There's very rare you read a book that's like that you don't think, oh, that was a few pages too long, or I could have done with a bit more than that. This is just exactly what it should be. And now theatre. I only was given 2 things to review in December, and one of them got cancelled because all the cast had COVID. So the other one was Macbeth at the Donmar. And I was excited about this because David Tennant was playing Macbeth, and I like David Tennant. I've liked him since Casanova. I like him in Doctor Who, and that was going to be exciting. And in fact, the day was going to be super exciting because originally it was going to be on a Friday, and so the school were getting in School Shakespeare Company who were going to do Macbeth, and then in the evening or in the afternoon, it was the school fair in which I was Father Christmas. I hasten to add to anyone listening, I'm not the real Father Christmas, but I'm standing in for him. Here's a picture of me as Father Christmas, and then I was going to go to Macbeth, so it was a weird Macbeth Father Christmas sandwich. But in the end, even though the press night was on Friday, I ended up being given the Saturday matinee, and I rushed off, and I gave myself an hour to do a half-hour journey because I'm always really early for these things because I hate the idea of being late. And then I got off I made a stupid choice. I decided to go to Covent Garden Station. I got off there, and it took me 20 minutes to get from the train platform to the ticket barrier. And so I was 2 minutes late for the production, and I held the whole production up. So David Tennant, very sorry, you were waiting for me. But then they came on, and they did their thing. And David Tennant was really good. But this was a weird production because you watched it whilst listening to headphones. And so all the actors had mics. And so it was their live performance and their live talking that was coming into you, but it's being mixed with soundtracks and sound design and music and stuff. So for all the ghosty bits and witchy bits, that added to it for Macbeth. But it also meant they could perform it completely differently. They didn't have to announce or project. And so when Lady Macbeth says, "Screw your courage to the sticking place," she whispered it so quietly that really, as an audience, you wouldn't have heard it. It went right into David Tennant's ear, but it also went into your ear. And that was very intriguing. It allowed them to play it very differently, and it made Macbeth and Lady Macbeth very quiet and not "Mwahaha, I'm going to be the bad king," but just sort of this, unsettling. That was quite clever and quite good. But it did mean that when you'd finished, you didn't have that feeling of being an audience sitting in a thing together. You didn't feel like you were together because you all had your own experiences, and it didn't quite feel like you were in the same room as the actors, even though you were, because all the sound was mediated. It wasn't straight from their lips to your ears. So it has its benefits and its minuses. But yeah, that was my December, and I had a Christmas, and it was a very nice Christmas. I was with my parents, and then we went to my sister's, and it was all lovely, very nice, very good. This year, well, a lot might be happening this year, but in terms of theatre, I've only got one thing so far, so we'll see. Maybe my being a bit late to David Tennant got back to them and they don't want to give me stuff. I don't know. Oh, who'll see? Anyway, have a lovely new year, and I hope you had a great Christmas, and goodbye.